This is my BMW K75. It's a 1987 model and I've had it since the year 2000, so I've been riding it roughly for 23 years. It's a 3-cylinder 740 petrol, fuel injection, water cooled, all singing, all dancing, sports touring bike. One of the major differences between this bike and the later ones is this has got a rear drum brake, but otherwise they're pretty much the same. And today I'm going to change the clutch cable. There are two reasons to change the clutch cable. The obvious one is that the cable itself is broken, and normally it will break just here because this is the highest tension point, or that the cable is stretched and it's no longer functioning. In my case I'm a bit unhappy that it makes this noise. It never used to make this noise, so I think that the cable is at the end of its life, and this is where it's going to wear most. I was trying to remember when I last changed the clutch cable, and it must have been shortly after I got it, and I put on the Venhill Featherlight cable, Teflon control cables. These are maintenance free, you don't oil them, they've got nylon and Teflon inners, so they can just go straight on. This is the cable that I've bought, and I've bought it from Motorworks UK. It's a Venhill cable, so Venhill manufacture cables. It's a Venhill Featherlight, which is what's on the bike already, and also it is the long pattern. So my bike, though it doesn't have high bars, it doesn't have the low bars of the K75S. Also, I've since put risers on it, so it's worth getting that particular cable. I've also bought, under advice, the little felt block, but to be honest I don't actually know what that's for yet. I don't think there's one on my bike now. The cable comes complete with a new brass nipple and a bellows to protect the cable, and a new bellows at the other end, and obviously a nice new end. When I come to fit it, I'll have to make sure that the fitting that this terminal goes into is not worn out. The overall length of the cable is 1.65 meters. The cable comes from here, it's routed around and under the tank, across the top of the airbox, and right down to the control lever in the back of the bike. And the easiest thing to do is to just pull in the lever and take it off at that end. If you pull in the lever and jam a piece of wood under it, when you push the lever back out, you can then easily just take this end out like that, and it's disconnected. So now it's free to be taken off the bike. At this end it connects into a brake nipple, a conventional one, so you just need to release it and then pull it through. Make a note of where the adjuster is and then undo the locking nut as far as it will go. See, mine are all nice and free because I look after the bike. Also note that there's no slit in this for taking the cable out sideways. It has to go out that way. Then wind this adjuster in to give you the maximum amount of slack. Because I haven't done this for such a long time, I'm actually going to take the lever off, and to do that you need a screwdriver and a spanner. So because I've looked after the bike, it's turned out that this is actually nice and grease and free and relatively easy to get out. I just need to push it through with a screwdriver, and then I can drop this lever out completely. There's the pivot pin and the locking nut, and I need a 10mm spanner to undo that. So I've pulled that right out so it's easier to take apart, and you can see there's lots of lovely moly grease in there. I'm going to clean that all out with white spirit. You need to remember that this is the clutch interlock switch, and if that doesn't work properly you won't be able to start your bike. On a lot of bikes they have a switch on the side stand. This bike doesn't have that because it has a self-retracting side stand, but it does have a clutch interlock switch. So if you're in gear, you need to pull the clutch in to start it. So that pops out sideways, and then you can take this nipple off and reuse it. You have to make sure that hasn't been worn out. There's the cable barrel, and it's in really good condition. There's no sign of wear, and it also fits really tightly into the handle, so I don't need to replace that. You can now get stainless steel replacements which cost £5, and probably a worthwhile upgrade if you actually need to do that. Now we're coming to the tricky part, which is where we use this cable to pull through the new cable. And one thing we're going to see is this bellows here. This is just going to get in the way, so that'll have to come off. I'll be attaching the cable to this end and pulling it through under the tank and all the way down to there. If you try to do it the other way round, that bellows is just going to snag on everything as it goes. This end pulls through, and it's worth noting that will actually pass through, so that this should work. I now need to attach the new cable to the other end and pull it through to meet here. Now it's kind of binding just here, so I'm going to have to watch out for that. When I've done this before, I've bound it up with duct tape or gaffer tape, but I'm going to try using these tiny little cable ties in the hope that that'll just easily draw through. So it's now or never, moment of truth. So you have to fight it out of this hole first, and then hopefully we can just carefully draw it through. Now I think it's one of these jobs where it'd be really good to have a friend to guide the other end, but otherwise it's just going to be a matter of keep walking around and making sure that it doesn't get bound up as it goes through. It's got this far, which is more than halfway, but it's actually bound up on something in here, so I'm just going to quickly lift the tank. I don't need to disconnect it, just lift it up. I've just lifted the tank, and I can see that where I actually pushed this, it's just folded it over and it can't pass through, so I just need to pull it more carefully from the other end. I had to take the fuel tank off, and on my bike that's really easy. All you do is disconnect the two fuel pipes and disconnect the electric connection for the fuel pump, and then you can see down and you can see that the clutch cable has been passed through this cable tie, and there was no way that was going to pull through, so I just need to release this cable tie, and then I can let it continue its journey, still following the correct path. I must have done this some years ago and forgotten all about it. So with that released, that easily pulled through, and because I can actually get at the loom and all the parts, I could just move things in and out of the way. I can also see that it's gone exactly where it's supposed to go. I'll put another cable tie in for these electrics, but I won't pass this through again. Now interestingly, in the Venhill instructions, they tell you that if you pass these through cable ties, to leave them loose to allow movement, which I had actually done, but it wouldn't allow me to pull the cable through. So now you've got to feed the other end up through the steering yoke, making sure it goes to the inside of the stanchion and not the outside, otherwise that will pull, and then that just comes into position, and hopefully that's got lots of give and lots of forgiveness for when I put it back on. I'm going to clean out all the old grease using white spirit, and I've got this is a Boots electric toothbrush, and you can replace the battery in it, and it vibrates and it makes a brilliant cleaner, and they're only £3 each. I'm ready to put it all back together now. I've cleaned up the pivot pin by putting in an electric drill and zooming it around on very fine grit. There's no point in really cleaning that, and now I need to go and find out what this little felt damper is for. I assume it goes in the handlebar adjuster, but mine doesn't have one, so I need to go and do some research. The internet has been no help. They tell you to put a drop of oil on it before it goes in the jacket. I'm going to assume that it goes on there and inside the adjuster to keep it from touching the metal. I'm actually going to plaster that up with CV joint grease before I force that right in. Now all I need to do is put it all back together. That's all nicely plastered up with lift moly grease, which lasts forever and is really effective. Because this new cable doesn't have the stretch in it that the old one had, it won't quite reach here. So I now need to use the adjuster over there to slacken that off so I can get a bit more slack out of this lever in order to connect that before making the final adjustment. The distance from this point to the nipple needs to be 75 millimeters, and to achieve that you use the adjuster, which you can just see in the distance, the little adjuster nut, and then tighten it down with the lock nut. You need a 13 and a 10mm spanner to do that. So when you're doing that, just do it up till it's just touching, then do it up a quarter of a turn, then do up the lock nut, and then check the operation of the cable, and if you've done it right, it should all move very smoothly. I'm going to put some more CV grease in that joint. It doesn't look like there's enough. You need 5mm play just here to make sure it's not binding, and you use this adjuster to achieve that, and then lock it down. And that's the adjustment done. And the only real way to check it is to run up the bike and put it in and out of gear. So I need to put the fuel tank back on now. And so the very encouraging thing is it doesn't make that funny noise anymore, which is obviously where the cable was starting to delaminate and bind. I've got quite a lot of grease in there. That should last long enough. So that's the original cable, and that is 1.5 meters. The longer one, 1.65 meters, went on fine. I've got handlebar risers, and also in the summer I can put drop bars on there without straining any of the cables. I now need to start it up and make sure the clutch biting point is in the correct place. When I start it, it is going to smoke like hell because it hasn't been run for at least 2 months. It's really hot today, so I shouldn't need any choke. Anyway, here goes. Actually nowhere near as smoky as I was expecting, and the back wheel isn't going round, which it normally does, which makes me wonder whether or not that's not set correctly. So if I let the clutch out, oh, you can see that's really struggling, so I need to readjust that. So that was weird. Because the bike hasn't been ridden for a while, the back brake had actually seized on. Releasing it a quarter of a turn and it's now fine. There was nothing to do with the clutch. So if I just put that into gear, away we go. No problem. Oh. Live and learn. Bike just needs a run down the road now to prove that it's correctly set up. Some small adjustments at the handlebar and we should be there. Although the old cable looks fairly sound, up, hidden away, you can see the actual casing is broken and has rusted through. That's probably why it's binding. Definitely needed to be replaced. And that would be hidden where you can't see it. That's up underneath the tank.